The sunlight caught the edge of the framed Oscar on the shelf, casting a golden glow across Clint Eastwood's office. At 92, his eyes still held that same intensity that had captivated audiences for generations. Outside the window, the Warner Bros. Lot hummed with activity, but in here, time seemed suspended. Marcus Reynolds adjusted his recorder with trembling fingers, a symptom he'd learned to hide but never ignore. 30 years had passed since that disastrous interview, the one that had nearly destroyed his career before it began, the one where a single thoughtless word had caused Eastwood to walk away mid-sentence. Now, here they were again, face to face, two men with more behind them than ahead. What neither realized was how this meeting would reshape both their legacies. What would happen when Clint Eastwood finally addressed the word that ended their first interview 3 decades ago? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The alarm clock's incessant beeping pulled Marcus Reynolds from a fitful sleep. The red digits showed 5:30 a.m. Early, but he needed the extra time these days. At 62, mornings weren't as simple as they once were. He reached for the small pill organizer on his nightstand, the plastic compartments a daily reminder of his new reality. 3 years into his Parkinson's diagnosis, and still every morning felt like a betrayal by his own body. "Another day," he muttered, swinging his legs over the edge of the bed, waiting for the medication to steady his trembling hands. His apartment in West Hollywood was modest but comfortable. Walls lined with framed magazine covers, evidence of a career that had somehow survived decades in an industry that typically discarded journalists like yesterday's news. The most prominent frame held his first major cover story for Entertainment Weekly from 1993. It should have come a year earlier, but that was before the incident. Before Eastwood. Marcus shuffled to the bathroom, catching his reflection in the mirror. Silver hair thinning but still there, lines etched around pale blue eyes that had witnessed the rise and fall of countless Hollywood careers. He'd documented them all, but never his own near demise. The shower helped with the stiffness, hot water beating against muscles that increasingly betrayed him. Under the spray, his mind drifted back to 1992, to the young, arrogant reporter he'd been, 29 years old, thinking he knew everything, believing shock value trumped integrity. One comment, one thoughtless word about Morgan Freeman, and Clint Eastwood had walked out mid-sentence, leaving Marcus stammering apologies to an empty chair. His editor had buried the story, relegating him to puff pieces for a year afterward. "You'll be lucky if anyone agrees to speak with you again," she had said, disappointment evident in her voice. She hadn't been wrong. As he dried off, his phone buzzed with a text from Lisa Chen, his assistant for the past 5 years. "Don't forget your recorder. Charged it myself yesterday. Meeting you at the Warner Bros. Gate at 10. You've got this." Lisa had become more than an assistant. She was the buffer between his declining health and a world that moved too quickly. At 34, she could have moved on to bigger opportunities, but she stayed, claiming she learned more from him than any journalism school. Marcus dressed carefully. Dark blue jacket, light blue shirt, no tie. Professional, but not trying too hard. The Eastwood interview had been in the works for 3 months, arranged by Sophia Mendez, his editor at Vanity Fair. Sophia was half his age and twice as ambitious, but she respected his experience and more. Importantly, she'd fought for him to keep his column when the tremors made typing difficult. "Eastwood only talks to journalists with gray hair these days," she'd told him when assigning the interview. "Says the young ones don't know their history." If only she knew their history. Marcus had never told her about the 1992 incident. It wasn't in his official bio, and the pre-internet age had been forgiving to journalists' mistakes in ways today's world would never allow. The footage existed somewhere in an archive, but it had never made it to air. His career had slowly recovered, one thoughtful article at a time, until the Eastwood walkout became just a whispered anecdote among older entertainment reporters. In his kitchenette, Marcus made coffee, the ritual of measuring grounds and waiting for the brew a daily meditation. He pulled out his worn leather notebook, flipping through his research notes on Eastwood's current project, a film about an aging rodeo star reconnecting with an estranged daughter. Rumored to be his final film as director, though Eastwood had retired several times before. His doorbell rang precisely at 8:30. Lisa Chen stood in the hallway, tablet in hand, her efficient smile already in place. At 5'3", she seemed to occupy more space than her frame suggested, an energy that had carried her from a childhood in Oakland's Chinatown to UCLA's journalism program. "You look good," she said, assessing him with the critical eye that had become part of their morning routine. "How are the hands?" Marcus held them out. The tremor was minimal. The medication was working. For now. Good enough to hold a recorder. He tried for lightness, but they both knew what was at stake. This interview could be his last big assignment if the tremors worsened. "I've got backup batteries, your medication schedule, and a full dossier on everyone currently working with Eastwood." She handed him a slim folder. "Also, traffic looks bad on the 101, so we should head out by 9. Lisa's efficiency was both comforting and occasionally suffocating. Today, he was grateful for it. "Any word from Sophia?" he asked, collecting his jacket. "She called while you were in the shower. Just checking that you're good to go. I told her you were born ready." Lisa's smile softened. "I didn't tell her you were up half the night watching Eastwood films." Marcus grunted acknowledgement. The truth was he'd been re-watching Unforgiven, the film Eastwood had been promoting when their paths first crossed, the film that went on to win Best Picture while Marcus was still trying to salvage his reputation. As they drove through Los Angeles traffic, Lisa briefed him on Eastwood's recent activities, his last film's modest success, his continued involvement with his Carmel restaurant, his increasingly rare public appearances. At 92, Eastwood had outlived most of his contemporaries, still directing films while many of his generation had long retreated from public life. "Did you know he still does his own stunts?" Lisa asked, scrolling through her notes. "Not stunts exactly," Marcus corrected, "but he insists on walking through every scene physically, showing actors exactly how he wants movement to look. Always has." "That's incredible at his age. That's Eastwood," Marcus said, rolling down the window. Slightly. The morning air carried the scent of jasmine from someone's garden. "He's always been exactly who he is. No compromise, including walking out when someone insults his colleagues, he thought, but didn't say." They arrived at the Warner Brothers gate at 9:45, 15 minutes early. The security guard checked their names against a list, his eyes lingering on Marcus's press badge, a newer version hanging beside the worn 1992 credential he kept as a reminder. He'd never been sentimental about many things, but that badge represented both his greatest professional shame and the beginning of his redemption. "Mr. Eastwood's team will meet you at Building 3, the guard said, handing back their IDs. "Follow the signs to Bungalow A." The Warner Brothers lot hadn't changed much in 30 years. Spanish-style buildings interspersed with modern structures, golf carts zipping along narrow pathways, the occasional tour group pointing at landmarks. The movie business presented a facade of timelessness while constantly reinventing itself, not unlike the journalists who covered it. Lisa checked her watch. "We're still early. Want to grab coffee at the commissary?" Marcus shook his head. "I want to walk the route, get my bearings." What he didn't say was that he needed to center himself, to prepare for seeing Eastwood again, the man who had, in many ways, defined the trajectory of his career without even knowing it. They found Building 3 easily enough, a 2-story structure with a series of connected bungalows. Outside Bungalow A, a young woman with a clipboard waited, her posture perfectly straight. "Mr. Reynolds?" She extended her hand. "I'm Amara, Mr. Eastwood's assistant. He's just finishing a call. Can I get you anything while you wait?" "I'm fine, thank you," Marcus said, suddenly aware of the slight tremor returning to his right hand. He casually moved it to his pocket. Lisa stepped forward. "I'm Lisa Chen, Mr. Reynolds' assistant. Is there somewhere I can set up his equipment?" Amara led them into a waiting area furnished with vintage movie posters, all Eastwood films spanning his career from Rawhide to his most recent directorial work. Marcus found himself staring at the Unforgiven poster, remembering the day. He'd watched it at the premiere 2 months after the interview incident, knowing he should have been writing the cover story about it. "Mr. Reynolds?" Amara returned. "Mr. Eastwood will see you now. Just you, if that's all right." Marcus nodded to Lisa, who squeezed his arm supportively. "I'll be right here if you need anything," she said, though they both knew the subtext. If the tremors got bad, if he needed his medication, if this went south like the last time. The inner office was spacious but not ostentatious. Natural light poured through large windows, illuminating walls covered with photographs. Eastwood with various presidents, on movie sets, with his family. A worn director's chair sat in one corner, and behind the substantial desk stood the man, Ew himself. At 92, Clint Eastwood was thinner than in his prime, but he still stood tall, his posture unyielding. The famous squint was perhaps deeper, the lines more pronounced, but the intensity that had made him a star remained undimmed. He wore a simple blue shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbows, and khaki pants. Casual but dignified. "Mr. Reynolds," he said, his voice that same gravelly timbre that had delivered countless memorable lines. "Thank you for coming." As they shook hands, Marcus fought to control his tremor, hoping Eastwood wouldn't notice. But those observant eyes missed nothing. "Parkinson's?" Eastwood asked directly. Marcus nodded, appreciating the straightforward approach. 3 years now. My cousin had it. Tough business." Eastwood gestured to the chairs positioned near the window rather than across the desk. "Let's sit where the light's better." As they settled, Marcus noticed the Oscar on the shelf, the one that had caught the sunlight when he first entered, for directing Unforgiven, the film that had changed everything for both of them in different ways. "So," Eastwood said, folding, his hands in his lap. "Vanity Fair wants to know about the new film." Marcus nodded, removing his recorder from his pocket. "May I?" Eastwood nodded, and Marcus placed the device on the small table between them, pressing record with a finger that, thankfully, remained steady. "Mr. Eastwood, Last Rodeo is rumored to be your final film as director. Is there truth to that?" Eastwood's mouth quirked slightly, not quite a smile. "People have been retiring me since I turned 60. I just keep finding stories that need telling." And that was how it began. A professional conversation between two men discussing craft, career, and legacy. For 30 minutes, Marcus asked thoughtful questions about the new film, and Eastwood provided measured responses, occasionally expanding when a topic interested him particularly. It was going well, better than well. Eastwood seemed to appreciate Marcus's knowledge of his filmography, nodding approvingly when Marcus referenced specific scenes from lesser-known works. The conversation flowed naturally to Eastwood's directing philosophy. "What I've always believed," Eastwood was saying, "is that trust on a set goes both ways. The actors trust me not to waste their time, and I trust them to—" He stopped mid-sentence, his eyes narrowing as he studied Marcus's face. "Have we met before? You seem familiar." The moment Marcus had both dreaded and anticipated had arrived. He could lie, could claim they'd crossed paths at some industry event years ago, but 30 years of building journalistic integrity after, that one catastrophic mistake had taught him the value of truth, however uncomfortable. "Yes, Mr. Eastwood, we have." Marcus took a deep breath. "I interviewed you in 1992 for the Unforgiven press junket. It didn't end well. A shadow of recognition crossed Eastwood's face, followed by something harder. The famous squint intensified. "You're that kid. The one who made the comment about Morgan." The word hung unspoken between them, but they both knew what it had been. A racial slur casually tossed into a question, dressed up as edgy journalism. The kind of word that didn't belong in any interview, especially not about a man of Morgan Freeman's caliber. "Yes," Marcus admitted, feeling the shame as freshly as he had 3 decades ago. "That was me. I was young and stupidly trying to be provocative. You were right to walk out." Eastwood's expression remained unreadable. He reached over and pressed a stop on Marcus's recorder. "Let's take a break from the official interview." Marcus's heart sank. This was it. History repeating itself. He'd lose this opportunity, disappoint Sophia, confirm that some mistakes couldn't be outrun no matter how much time passed. But Eastwood didn't stand up. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, studying Marcus with that penetrating gaze that had intimidated actors, directors, and journalists for decades. "Tell me what happened to you after that day," he said finally. Not a question, but a command. Marcus swallowed hard. "My editor buried the story. I was put on fluff pieces for a year, celebrity pet profiles, set visits where I wasn't allowed to actually interview anyone. I almost quit journalism altogether. But you didn't. No. I decided instead to be better, to do the work right, to respect the craft, both yours and mine." Marcus met Eastwood's gaze directly. "That day changed the trajectory of my career, Mr. Eastwood, and looking back, I'm grateful for it. I needed that wake-up call." Eastwood nodded slowly, his expression softening almost imperceptibly. "I remember walking out and thinking I might have been too harsh on a kid who didn't know better, but I couldn't let that comment about Morgan stand. You were protecting your colleague. It's what good leaders do." A ghost of a smile touched Eastwood's lips. "You've done your homework on me? I've been covering your career for 30 years, Mr. Eastwood, even when you wouldn't talk to me directly. And now you've got Parkinson's." It wasn't said with pity, just as a statement of fact. "Yes. How long can you keep working?" The directness of the question took Marcus aback, but he appreciated it. Too many people danced around his condition. "The doctors say it varies. Could be years before it affects my cognitive functions. The tremors make typing harder, but I have an assistant who helps. I'm not ready to quit." Eastwood nodded, seeming to come to a decision. He leaned forward. "I'm going to propose something different than what your magazine is expecting," he said. "The set visit for Last Rodeo starts tomorrow. I want you there." Marcus blinked in surprise. "For an extended interview?" "No." Eastwood's eyes held a hint of amusement now. "For access, exclusive access. See how the film gets made. Talk to the cast, the crew. See how I work. At the end, we'll do your interview properly." Marcus couldn't quite believe what he was hearing. "That's incredibly generous, Mr. Eastwood." "Clint," he corrected. "And it's not generosity. It's curiosity. I want to see if you really have changed as much as you think you have." It was a challenge, a test. 30 years after walking out on Marcus, Eastwood was giving him a second chance, while reserving the right to judge if he deserved it. "I understand," Marcus said. "Thank you, Clint." Eastwood stood, signaling the end of their conversation. "Tomorrow, 6 a.m. We start early. Bring a jacket. Desert mornings are cold." As Marcus rose, he noticed his hand trembling again. Eastwood noticed too. "Will your condition be a problem on set?" "No," Marcus answered firmly. "I manage it." "Good. Because I don't tolerate disruptions during filming." With that, the legendary director extended his hand. As they shook, Marcus felt the calluses earned through decades of work both in front of and behind the camera. This wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was an opportunity, one he hadn't expected and couldn't afford to waste. "Tomorrow, then," Marcus said. "Tomorrow," Eastwood confirmed, already turning back to his desk. "And Reynolds?" "Yes? Leave your assistant home. On my sets, everyone carries their own weight." As Marcus left the office, he found Lisa waiting anxiously in the outer room. "Well?" she asked. "How did it go?" Marcus looked down at the recorder in his hand, at the barely 30 minutes of official interview recorded when he'd expected 2 hours. "Change of plans," he said, still processing what had just happened. "How do you feel about a trip to the desert?" The drive back from Warner Brothers was surreal. Marcus stared out the window at the passing Los Angeles landscape while Lisa peppered him with questions about the sudden change in plans. "So he just invited you to the set? No explanation? After recognizing you from an interview 3 decades ago?" Lisa's disbelief was evident as she navigated through midday traffic. "It's more complicated than that," Marcus said, watching palm trees sway in the distance. How could he explain the weight of that long-ago moment? "We have history." "What kind of history makes Clint Eastwood invite a journalist for exclusive set access?" "That never happens, especially not with him. He's famously private about his process." Marcus sighed, knowing he needed to tell her at least part of the truth. "In 1992, I said something offensive during an interview with him. About Morgan Freeman." Eastwood walked out. Lisa's eyes widened. "That was you? The racist comment guy? That story's legendary in journalism school as what not to do." Marcus winced. "I wasn't being racist. I was being a provocative idiot trying to make a name for myself. But yes, that was me. And now he's invited you to his set." Lisa shook her head in disbelief. "Either he's the most forgiving person in Hollywood, or he's setting me up for some kind of public reckoning," Marcus finished. "I know. Are you going to call Sophia?" Marcus nodded. "As soon as we get back to my place. She needs to approve the change in scope anyway." But he already knew what Sophia would say. Exclusive access to Clint Eastwood's final film set? She'd trade her designer wardrobe for that opportunity. The real question was whether this was the professional opportunity of a lifetime or a trap designed to publicly humiliate him for a 3-decade-old transgression. Back at his apartment, Marcus took his afternoon medication while Lisa made the call to Sophia on speakerphone. As expected, the editor was ecstatic. "He's giving you what?" Sophia's voice crackled through Lisa's phone. "Exclusive set access? For how long?" "He didn't specify," Marcus answered, settling into his armchair. "But filming wraps in 2 weeks according to the production schedule." This is beyond perfect. If this is really his last film, having inside access to the process, Sophia trailed off, clearly calculating the publicity value. "We'll need to rethink the entire piece. This could be a cover story, Marcus." "There's a catch," Marcus said. "He doesn't want Lisa there. Says everyone carries their own weight on his set." A brief silence followed. They all understood what that meant. Marcus managing his condition alone, without the buffer Lisa usually provided. "Can you handle that?" Sophia finally asked, her voice softening slightly. It was the closest she ever came to acknowledging his health challenges directly. Marcus looked at his hands. The afternoon dose was working. The tremor was minimal. "Yes, I'll have my medication. I'll manage. I'll be on standby," Lisa added. "If there's an emergency, I can be wherever they're filming within hours." "Where exactly is the set?" Sophia asked. "Victorville," Marcus answered. "Old Western town set they've used for a few films. It's about 2 hours from LA, depending on traffic." "All right. I'm approving this change in scope. We'll adjust the contract to cover your expenses for the extended period." Sophia's businesslike tone returned. "This is huge, Marcus. Don't screw it up." After the call ended, Lisa began researching accommodations near Victorville while Marcus packed his medication, notebooks, and recording equipment. The enormity of what was happening hadn't fully settled in yet. 30 years after their disastrous first encounter, he would be spending days, possibly weeks, in close proximity to a man who had every reason to despise him. "There's a decent hotel about 15 minutes from the filming location," Lisa reported, looking up from her tablet. "I've booked you for 2 weeks, though we can extend if needed." Marcus nodded absently, his thoughts elsewhere. "What exactly did you say?" Lisa asked suddenly. "In that interview. What was the word?" Marcus shook his head. "It doesn't matter now. It was wrong then, and it would be wrong to repeat it now." "He must have seen something in you worth a second chance," Lisa offered. "Or he's never forgotten and wants to make sure I haven't either," Marcus replied. That night, sleep eluded him. Marcus lay awake, replaying that moment from 1992 in his mind. He'd been so eager to make an impression, to ask questions other journalists wouldn't dare. When the interview turned to Morgan Freeman's performance, Marcus had used that word so casually, framing it as a question about Hollywood stereotyping but really just trying to shock. The look on Eastwood's face had been unforgettable. Not anger, exactly, but a profound disappointment combined with ironclad resolve. He had simply stood up mid-sentence, removed his microphone, and walked out without another word. No outburst, no lecture, just a principled exit that spoke volumes. The next day, Marcus's editor had called him into her office. "What the hell were you thinking?" she had demanded, the unaired interview tape sitting on her desk like evidence at a trial. "I was trying to address racial stereotyping in Hollywood," he had attempted weakly. "No, you were trying to make headlines. By being controversial, and you did it at the expense of one of the finest actors working today, not to mention your own credibility." She had leaned forward, eyes blazing. "You're lucky Eastwood's team isn't making a bigger issue of this. The tape stays locked up, and you're on puff pieces until further notice." That moment had changed everything for Marcus. He had spent the next year interviewing celebrities about their vacation homes and favorite restaurants, the journalistic equivalent of being sent to the minors. But he had used that time to reflect, to read, to actually study the craft of filmmaking so he could ask meaningful questions when, if, he ever got another chance at serious journalism. By the time his alarm went off at 4 a.m., Marcus had slept, perhaps 3 hours total. He showered quickly, packed his final items, and triple-checked his medication schedule. The desert location meant unreliable cell service, so he needed to be entirely self-sufficient. The pre-dawn drive to Victorville was peaceful, the highway nearly empty except for long-haul trucks. As darkness gave way to the purple-gray light of early morning, the landscape transformed from suburban sprawl to arid desert dotted with Joshua trees. Marcus rolled down the window, letting the cool morning air wash over him. Whatever awaited him at the end of this drive, redemption or humiliation, at least he would face it clear-eyed. He arrived at the set location by 5:45 a.m. A temporary security checkpoint had been established at the entrance to what looked like an old Western movie lot. Wooden buildings designed to resemble a frontier town. A security guard checked his name against a list. "Reynolds, Eastwood's office called ahead about you." The guard handed him a production badge. "Wear this at all times. Crew parking is to the left, talent and production team to the right." "Where should I go?" Marcus asked, uncertain of his status. The guard squinted at his clipboard. "Says here you're to park with production. First row." Marcus followed the directions, parking his rental car in a nearly empty lot. Only a few vehicles had arrived this early. A silver Jeep, an older model pickup truck, and a sleek black SUV that screamed "Studio Executive." As he stepped out of his car, the crisp desert morning made him grateful for the jacket he'd brought. Per Eastwood's advice, the movie set was beginning to stir with early activity. Crew members hauled equipment, set dressers made final adjustments to storefronts, and catering staff prepared coffee stations. Marcus spotted a weathered sign reading Silver Creek 1885, mounted on the archway entrance to the fictional town. You must be Reynolds. Marcus turned to find a woman in her 60s approaching him. She wore practical clothes, jeans, boots, and a light jacket, with a headset hanging around her neck. Her silver hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and she carried herself with the confident efficiency of someone who had spent decades on film sets. Catherine Wilson, she introduced herself, extending a hand. Production partner. Clint said you'd be joining us. Marcus shook her hand, recognizing her name from his research. Kate Wilson had worked with Eastwood for over 30 years, rising from script supervisor to one of his most trusted collaborators. Thank you for having me, Marcus said. I appreciate the access. Kate's shrewd eyes assessed him, a hint of recognition flashing across her face. You're that journalist from the Freeman incident. So she remembered too. Marcus nodded, accepting the unavoidable association. That was a lifetime ago, he acknowledged. For you, maybe. Her tone was cool but professional. For some of us who were there, it left an impression. Before Marcus could respond, she gestured toward a cluster of directors' chairs set up near the camera equipment. Craft services is over there if you need coffee. Clint will be on set in 20 minutes. First shot is at the saloon. She paused, fixing him with a direct stare. 3 rules. Stay out of the crew's way, don't speak during takes, and if Clint asks for something, you do it without question. Clear? Crystal? Marcus replied, recognizing the protective nature of her instructions. Eastwood inspired fierce loyalty among his collaborators. Good. She turned to leave, then added over her shoulder, and if you're here to dig up dirt or write some exposé about a legend's last hurrah, save everyone the time and leave now. Without waiting for a response, she strode off toward a group of crew members, leaving Marcus to reflect on her warning. His reputation, at least the 30-year-old version of it, had preceded him. The vintage, Unforgiven movie poster couldn't have felt more present if it had been hanging right in front of him. Marcus made his way to the craft services table, pouring himself a cup of strong black coffee. As he sipped the bitter brew, he observed the set coming to life around him. This was Eastwood's domain, a film set run with military precision and minimal fuss. The legendary director was known for shooting quickly, often using the first or second take, trusting his actors and crew implicitly. It was the opposite of the perfectionist approach that dominated much of Hollywood. First time on an Eastwood set? The question came from a young man who couldn't have been more than 30, setting up sound equipment nearby. His warm brown skin contrasted with the vibrant blue of his knit cap, despite the desert morning being far too warm for such headgear. That obvious? Marcus asked with a small smile. You've got that trying not to look impressed expression that first-timers always have. The sound tech extended his hand. Miguel Ramirez, boom operator and unofficial set historian. Marcus introduced himself as they shook hands. You're young to be a historian. Miguel grinned. 5th Eastwood film. Started as an intern on The Mule. My uncle was a grip on $1 Million Baby, so I grew up hearing the legends. Any tips for surviving my first day? Stay quiet, stay alert, and don't expect small talk. Miguel adjusted his equipment. The man works fast. If you blink, you might miss him finishing a scene. A sudden hush fell over the set, the ambient noise dropping as if someone had turned down a volume dial. Marcus turned to see Clint Eastwood walking through the entrance of the fictional town, accompanied by a tall, distinguished-looking man in his 50s and a younger woman who appeared to be the script supervisor. Even at 92, Eastwood commanded attention without trying. He walked slowly but purposefully, his gaze taking in the set with the practiced eye of someone who had been framing shots for decades. He wore simple clothes, khaki pants, a blue button-down shirt, and a light jacket similar to the one he'd worn during their meeting. The crew snapped to attention, not out of fear, but respect. Marcus noted how Eastwood acknowledged various crew members with nods or brief words as he passed. recognition of the team that had worked with him on multiple projects. Miguel whispered, "That's James Morgan with him. Executive producer, studio, watchdog." Marcus observed the well-dressed man walking alongside Eastwood. Morgan carried himself with the confidence of someone who controlled budgets and made career-defining decisions over lunch. As the group drew closer, Marcus heard Eastwood's gravelly voice. "Let's get Thomas in position for the entrance shot. I want to catch that morning light coming through the saloon windows." They passed where Marcus stood without acknowledgement. He wasn't sure if Eastwood had even noticed him yet, and he didn't expect special treatment. He was here to observe, to document the process of what might be the final film from one of America's most iconic directors. "Places, everyone," Kate Wilson's voice carried across the set. "First team on set, please." Marcus watched as a young actor emerged from one of the trailers. Tomas Rivera, he presumed, the rising star who played the estranged son in this modern Western drama. Rivera moved with the easy confidence of someone comfortable in his skin, greeting crew members warmly as he made his way to the set. For the next hour, Marcus observed the methodical efficiency of Eastwood's directing style. True to his reputation, he kept instructions minimal, often just positioning actors with gentle guidance before calling for a take. Most scenes were completed in 1 or 2 attempts, with Eastwood typically satisfied with the first. There was no shouting, no dramatic interventions, just calm, focused work. Marcus took notes diligently, occasionally recording ambient sound on his device for atmosphere. He was careful to stay out of sight lines and work paths, positioning himself where he could observe without intruding. His right hand trembled slightly as he wrote, but he pushed through, focusing on capturing the details that would bring this experience to life for readers. During a brief break while the crew repositioned for a new angle, Eastwood finally acknowledged Marcus's presence. He walked over, hands in his pockets, squinting against the strengthening morning sun. "Getting what you need?" he asked without preamble. "Yes," Marcus replied. "Your directing style is fascinating, very economical." Eastwood nodded. "No point wasting people's time. Either you know what you want or you don't." Marcus seized the opportunity to ask a professional question. "The scene with Rivera entering the saloon. You only did 1 take. What were you seeing that told you it was right?" Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot. To us, now back to the story. A hint of approval crossed Eastwood's face at the substantive nature of the question. His hesitation at the threshold. It was genuine. Second take would have been him acting the hesitation instead of feeling it. Eastwood glanced toward where Rivera was talking with the cinematographer. Good actors give you truth the first time. Second time is just a copy. Before Marcus could follow up, James Morgan approached, his expression revealing displeasure at finding Eastwood chatting with the journalist. "Clint, we need to discuss the schedule adjustment for tomorrow's canyon scene," Morgan said, barely, acknowledging Marcus's presence. "In a minute," Eastwood replied calmly, not breaking eye contact with Marcus. "You're here to watch, Reynolds. So watch. We'll talk at lunch." With that, he turned and walked with Morgan toward the production tent, leaving Marcus to contemplate this small interaction. It wasn't warmth exactly, but it was acknowledgement, and coming from Clint Eastwood, that was significant. The morning progressed with a steady rhythm of setups and shots. Marcus observed how Eastwood worked with actors, never over-explaining, but somehow conveying exactly what he wanted. He noted how the crew anticipated needs before they were voiced, moving with the synchronicity of a team that understood their leader's vision implicitly. Around noon, Kate called for a lunch break. The crew dispersed to the catering tent while the principal actors retreated to their trailers. Marcus was unsure where he should go until he spotted Eastwood motioning him toward a small table set apart from the main dining area. As Marcus approached, he felt a familiar sensation in his right leg, a stiffness that signaled his medication was wearing off. He discreetly reached into his pocket for his pill case, removing his afternoon dose while taking a seat across from Eastwood. The director noticed the medication but made no comment, instead nodding toward a production assistant who promptly brought over 2 plates of grilled chicken and vegetables, simple, hearty food that characterized Eastwood's no-frills approach to filmmaking. "How's the Parkinson's treating you today?" Eastwood asked directly as Marcus swallowed his pill with water. "Manageable," Marcus replied, appreciating the straightforward question rather than awkward avoidance. "Medication helps. Mornings are better than afternoons." Eastwood nodded. "My cousin said the same. Said it was like his body kept changing. The rules on him." That's an apt description. They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes, the desert heat mitigated by a light breeze. In the distance, crew members laughed and talked, occasionally glancing curiously in their direction. "Your team seems surprised to see me sitting with you," Marcus observed. Eastwood's mouth quirked slightly. "I don't typically socialize with press on set." Why make an exception now? The question hung between them, addressing the elephant in the room. Why had Eastwood invited the journalist who had offended him 3 decades ago? Eastwood set down his fork, fixing Marcus with that penetrating gaze. "I've been reading your work, last 15 years or so." This revelation surprised Marcus. "You have?" "Your piece on Paul Newman's directing career. The interview with Scorsese, about film preservation. Good work, thoughtful." Eastwood took a sip of water. "Different from the kid who was trying to make headlines with shocking questions." Marcus felt a weight lift slightly from his shoulders. Eastwood had been tracking his professional redemption. "I learned my lesson," Marcus said quietly. "Seems like you did." Eastwood studied him for a moment longer. "I'm curious about people. Who change. Real change, not just talk. It's rare." Before Marcus could respond, James Morgan approached their table, his expression making clear his disapproval of this tête-à-tête. "Sorry to interrupt," he said, not sounding sorry at all, "but the investors are on the conference call, Clint. They're asking about the schedule adjustment." Eastwood sighed almost imperceptibly. "Tell them I'll be there in 5 minutes. Morgan." Hesitated, clearly wanting to pull Eastwood away immediately, but eventually nodded and stepped back, waiting at a discreet distance. "Studio politics," Eastwood said to Marcus. "Necessary evil." "Even you have to deal with that?" Marcus asked. "Especially me." "They're nervous about the budget on what might be my last rodeo." He gave a wry smile at the unintended pun with his film's title. "Been trying to retire me for years. Maybe this time they'll succeed." Eastwood stood, signaling the end of their lunch. "Watch the afternoon shoot. There's a scene with Thomas and Maria, the daughter character, that might interest you. Shows how we handle emotional confrontations without the usual Hollywood hysterics." After Eastwood left with Morgan, Marcus sat for a moment, processing. This wasn't the cold shoulder he had half expected, nor was it a warm embrace. It was professional respect, tentative perhaps, but present. Eastwood was giving him an opportunity to prove himself, to demonstrate that the change in his journalistic approach was genuine. The afternoon brought new challenges as the medication's effectiveness ebbed and flowed. Marcus found his right hand, increasingly uncooperative, making note-taking difficult. He switched to voice recording more often, whispering observations into his device during breaks in filming. Kate Wilson noticed his struggle during one such moment, approaching as he fumbled with his recorder. "Rough day?" she asked, her tone neutral but not unkind. "I've had better," Marcus admitted, "but I've had worse too." Kate studied him for a moment. "Clint mentioned your condition. Said you were managing it well." "I'm trying to," Marcus said. "Doesn't always cooperate on my schedule." Something in his candor seemed to soften her slightly. "There's a chair in the shade by the production tent. Better view of the emotional scene they're setting up next." It was an olive branch. Small, but significant. "Thank you," Marcus said sincerely. "Don't make me regret it," she replied, but the edge in her voice had dulled. From his new vantage point, Marcus had an excellent view of the set being prepared for the confrontation scene Eastwood had mentioned. The interior of a rustic cabin had been constructed with meticulous attention to detail. Weathered wooden walls, period-appropriate furniture, photographs in simple frames. Tomas Rivera sat alone at a table, reviewing his script while the actress playing his estranged daughter, Maria, received last-minute makeup touches. Eastwood returned from his investor call, looking slightly wearied by the corporate wrangling, but quickly regained his focus as he stepped onto the set. Marcus watched him speaking quietly with both actors, not giving direction so much as sharing a perspective. The actors nodded, seemingly energized rather than constrained by whatever he had said. "First team ready," called the assistant director. "Let's get picture." What followed was a masterclass in restrained emotional filmmaking. The scene depicted a father and daughter meeting after 15 years of estrangement, their conversation weighted with unspoken grief and resentment. Eastwood allowed the scene to unfold with minimal cuts, letting the actors build the tension naturally. When Tomas finally broke down, it wasn't with Hollywood histrionics but with a simple, devastating line delivered with quiet dignity. "I've been trying to find a way back to you since the day I left." The raw emotion in the performance moved several crew members to tears. Eastwood called "cut" softly, then simply nodded to the actors. "We got it. Moving on." No effusive praise, no dramatic discussion, just quiet acknowledgement of work well done. It was the Eastwood way, Marcus realized, creating space for authenticity and then recognizing it without fanfare when it appeared. The rest of the afternoon proceeded similarly, with Eastwood capturing several more scenes with the same efficient approach. As the golden hour light began to fade, Kate called a wrap for the day. The crew began breaking down equipment while Eastwood conferred with the cinematographer about tomorrow's schedule. Marcus was reviewing his notes when Tomas Rivera approached, curiosity evident in his expression. "You're the journalist, right? The one Eastwood invited personally?" Marcus nodded, introducing himself. Up close, Rivera looked even younger, perhaps early 30s, with an intensity in his dark eyes that explained why Eastwood had cast him in this complex role. "I'm trying to figure out why he let you on set," Rivera said candidly. "He's usually pretty strict about press access." "We have history," Marcus replied, deciding honesty was the best approach. "Not all of it good?" "Intriguing," Rivera smiled. "Must be some story there." "It is," Marcus acknowledged, "but probably not the one you're imagining." Rivera studied him for a moment longer. "Whatever it is, you must have impressed him somehow. Eastwood doesn't do things without purpose." As crew members called for Rivera, he excused himself, leaving Marcus to ponder his observation. Eastwood, indeed, did nothing without purpose. So, what was his purpose in bringing Marcus here, beyond mere curiosity about a journalist's redemption arc? As the set emptied, Marcus found himself alone near the saloon facade. The desert sunset painted the wooden buildings with golden light, creating a timeless quality that reminded him why Westerns had such enduring appeal. They existed in a space between history and myth, much like the directors who brought them to life. Reynolds. Marcus turned to find Eastwood approaching, jacket now on against the rapidly cooling desert air. "Thoughts on day one?" the director asked. "Illuminating," Marcus answered truthfully. "Your efficiency is remarkable, and the way you directed that emotional scene, giving space rather than dictating every nuance." Eastwood nodded, seemingly pleased with the observation. "Too many directors talk their actors to death. Good acting isn't intellectual. It's felt." They stood in companionable silence for a moment, watching the sunset colors intensify across the desert landscape. "Where are you staying?" Eastwood finally asked. "Hotel, about 15 minutes from here. The Sage Inn, I think it's called." Decent. Place. Their coffee is terrible. Eastwood turned to face him directly. Be back here at 5:30 tomorrow. We're shooting the canyon sequence. More complicated setups might give you better material for your article. It was a directive, not a suggestion, and Marcus understood the implicit message. Today had been a test, and he had passed sufficiently to be invited back. "I'll be here," he promised. As Eastwood walked away toward the parking area, Marcus felt a curious mix of professional satisfaction and personal uncertainty. The day had gone better than he could have hoped, but he still couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Eastwood's invitation than professional courtesy or even curiosity about a reformed journalist. The drive to his hotel was reflective, the desert darkness broken only by his headlights and the occasional passing car. His phone had several missed calls from Lisa and one from Sophia, but with barely 1 bar of service he decided they could wait until he reached the hotel. The Sage Inn was exactly as advertised. Decent but unremarkable, a 2-story building, with exterior corridors and a small swimming pool that had seen better days. After checking in, Marcus settled into his room, took his evening medication, and called Lisa. "Finally," she answered on the first ring. "I've been worried sick. How did it go?" Marcus gave her a brief summary of the day from Kate Wilson's initial, coolness to Eastwood's lunch invitation and the invitation to return tomorrow. "So he's actually giving you real access," Lisa said, sounding impressed. "Sophia's going to be thrilled. Speaking of which, she wants you to call her ASAP. It's late," Marcus noted, checking his watch. "Nearly 9 p.m. She said regardless of the time." Sighing, Marcus promised to call his editor next, then asked, "How are things there?" "Quiet. I've been researching Eastwood's filmography, looking for patterns in his directing styles over the decades. Thought it might help with your background material." "Thanks, Lisa. I appreciate that." Marcus felt a pang of gratitude for her dedication. "I should probably go. Early call time tomorrow." After hanging up, Marcus dialed Sophia's number, preparing himself for the barrage of questions he knew would come. "Tell me everything," Sophia demanded upon answering, not bothering with preliminaries. Marcus provided a more detailed account than he had given Lisa, emphasizing the artistic aspects of Eastwood's directing that would interest Sophia's readers. "This is gold, Marcus," she said when he finished. "Absolute gold. No journalist has had this kind of access to Eastwood's process in years, maybe decades." "It's early days," Marcus cautioned. "He could change his mind tomorrow." "But he won't," Sophia said confidently. "He invited you for a reason. Figure out what that reason is, and you've got your story angle." After promising to keep her updated, Marcus ended the call and sat on the edge of his bed, exhaustion suddenly washing over him. The day had been physically taxing, his condition making every movement an exercise in concentration. But mentally, he felt more engaged than he had in years. As he prepared for bed, Marcus's thoughts returned to that pivotal moment in 1992. The word he had used so carelessly had been indefensible, a racial slur disguised as a provocative question about Hollywood stereotyping. In the decades since, he had never used it again, had actively written against such language in several pieces about representation in film. Had Eastwood seen those articles? Was that part of what he meant about tracking Marcus's career? The question lingered as Marcus drifted into an exhausted sleep, the medication quieting his tremors, but not his thoughts. The next morning arrived with merciless desert brightness. At 4:30 a.m., Marcus awoke feeling stiff, his muscles protesting the previous day's exertion. He took his medication, showered, and dressed carefully, selecting clothes appropriate for what promised to be a hot day shooting in a canyon location. Eastwood was right about the coffee. It was terrible. Marcus grimaced as he sipped the weak brew in the hotel's small breakfast area, forcing down a banana and granola bar for sustenance. His phone buzzed with a text from Lisa. "Good luck today. Remember, this could be the career piece." No pressure, Marcus thought wryly. He arrived at the designated meeting point, a dirt parking area at the base of a dramatic canyon, by 5:15 a.m. The crew was already setting up, lights being positioned to capture the perfect morning light bouncing off the red rock walls. Marcus spotted Eastwood in conversation with the cinematographer, both men gesturing toward various points in the canyon where the action would unfold. Kate Wilson noticed his arrival and approached, her manner slightly less frosty than the previous day. "Canyon shoot is more complicated," she informed him. "Stay behind the line marked with orange tape. Safety issue with some of the sequences." "Understood," Marcus nodded. "Thanks for the heads up." "There's a production tent with water and shade," she added, pointing to a white canopy tent set back from the main shooting area. "Desert heat is no joke, especially for someone on medication." The consideration surprised him. "I appreciate that." Kate studied him for a moment longer. "Clint seems to think you're worth the accommodation. Don't make him question that assessment." With that, she returned to her duties, leaving Marcus to find a suitable observation point. He selected a spot near the production tent with a clear view of the main shooting area, but well behind the safety line. From his vantage point, he could see the entire crew operation while staying out of the way. Today's filming involved a tense scene where Tomas's character confronts a rival rancher in the dramatic setting of the canyon. The physical demands were greater than yesterday's emotional scenes, with horses, controlled explosions, and complex blocking to coordinate. Marcus was struck by how Eastwood's directing style remained consistent despite the increased complexity. He gave minimal instructions, trusted his team implicitly, and maintained a calm presence that seemed to steady everyone around him. Even when a technical issue delayed a crucial shot, Eastwood simply waited patiently, conserving his energy while others scrambled to resolve the problem. During a break, while the special effects team reset for an explosion sequence, James Morgan approached Marcus unexpectedly. The executive producer had avoided him entirely the previous day, and his sudden appearance put Marcus on alert. "Enjoying the show, Mr. Reynolds?" Morgan asked, his tone just shy of condescending. "It's fascinating," Marcus replied neutrally. "Mr. Eastwood runs an impressive set." "Yes, he does." Morgan adjusted his expensive sunglasses. "Which is why I'm curious about your presence here. Clint doesn't typically allow press such intimate access, especially not to what may be his final film. You'd have to ask him about his reasons," Marcus deflected. "I did." Morgan's smile didn't reach his eyes. "He mentioned something about second chances. I looked you up after that. Found some interesting history." Marcus tensed but kept his expression neutral. "We all have history, Mr. Morgan. Indeed, some more problematic than others." Morgan leaned slightly closer. "Let me be direct. This film represents a significant investment for the studio. Mr. Eastwood's legacy is important to us. We wouldn't want anything to compromise either." The threat was veiled but unmistakable. "My job is to document, not disrupt," Marcus stated firmly. "See that it stays that way." Morgan straightened, professional smile returning. "Enjoy the rest of the shoot." As Morgan walked away, Marcus noticed Eastwood watching the interaction from a distance, his expression unreadable. Had the director sent Morgan to test him, or was the executive acting on his own protective instincts? The rest of the morning proceeded without incident, though Marcus felt Morgan's eyes on him periodically. The canyon sequence was visually stunning, Eastwood's minimalist directing style allowing the natural drama of the landscape to enhance the human conflict portrayed. Around midday, Marcus felt the familiar stiffness returning to his right side. He discreetly took his medication, but the physical strain of standing for hours in the desert heat was taking its toll. As he adjusted his position, trying to find relief, he accidentally knocked over his water bottle, sending it clattering down a small rock formation. The noise wasn't loud enough to disrupt the distant filming, but it drew the attention of Tomas. Rivera, who was taking a break nearby. The young actor retrieved the bottle and brought it back to Marcus. "Rough day?" he asked, noticing Marcus's discomfort. "Just the usual battle with uncooperative limbs," Marcus replied with a self-deprecating smile. Thomas gestured to a folding chair nearby. "Take a seat. No one's using it." Marcus gratefully accepted, easing himself down. "Thanks." "No problem." Thomas remained standing, studying Marcus with interest. "So, what's the real story between you and Eastwood? Everyone's speculating." "I'm sure they are," Marcus acknowledged, "but it's not as mysterious as people seem to think. I made a mistake in an interview with him a long time ago. Said something I shouldn't have. He walked out. And now he's giving you exclusive access to his set?" Tomas raised an eyebrow. "There's got to be more to it than that." "Maybe he believes in redemption arcs," Marcus suggested. Thomas laughed. "Like in his films. The flawed man seeking forgiveness." He glanced toward where Eastwood was conferring with the stunt coordinator. "Working with him has been unlike anything else in my career. He barely gives direction, but somehow I always know exactly what he wants." "He creates a space for authenticity," Marcus observed. "Yes." Tomas's eyes lit up. "That's exactly it. In Hollywood, everyone's always telling you what to do, how to be. Eastwood just watches, waits for truth to emerge." Their conversation was interrupted by a call for Thomas to return to set. As the actor jogged away, Marcus was struck by how Eastwood's approach to directing mirrored his approach to Marcus himself, creating space, watching, waiting to see what emerged naturally rather than forcing a particular outcome. The afternoon brought new challenges as the desert temperature climbed. Marcus found his medication less effective in the heat, his tremors more pronounced. He continued taking notes as best he could, occasionally retreating to the shade of the production tent when the symptoms became too difficult to manage discreetly. During one such retreat, he was surprised to find Kate Wilson taking a rare break, studying production schedules with intense concentration. She glanced up as he entered, nodding slightly in acknowledgement. "Holding up?" she asked, her tone suggesting professional courtesy rather than personal concern. "Managing," Marcus replied, taking a seat at the far end of the folding table. Kate returned to her schedules, but after a moment she spoke without looking up. "I was there that day, you know. In 1992, Marcus stilled. "You were?" Script supervisor back then. Witnessed the whole thing. She finally looked at him directly. "Never seen Clint that angry, before or since. He doesn't show it like most people, but those of us who know him could tell." "I don't blame him," Marcus said quietly. Kate studied him appraisingly. "You really have changed, haven't you? The hotshot with the provocative questions wouldn't have admitted fault so readily." 30 years provides perspective," Marcus replied. "And consequences are effective teachers." Something like respect flickered in Kate's eyes. "Well, for what it's worth, I think Clint sees it too. He wouldn't have you here otherwise." Before Marcus could respond, a production assistant hurried into the tent. "Ms. Wilson, we need you on set. Issue with the stunt sequence timing." Kate rose immediately, professional efficiency returning. As she passed Marcus, she paused briefly. "There's extra water in the cooler. Stay hydrated. We don't need any medical emergencies out here." The small gesture of consideration felt like a significant shift in their dynamic. Marcus thanked her, watching as she strode purposefully back to the set, already barking instructions into her headset. The remainder of the afternoon blurred into a succession of impressive sequences. The confrontation between Tomas and the rival rancher culminating in a tense standoff, a dramatic horseback chase through the canyon, and finally, as the sun began its descent, a quiet moment where Tomas's character contemplated the consequences of his actions against the backdrop of the majestic landscape. By the time Eastwood called a wrap for the day, Marcus was exhausted but exhilarated. The physical toll had been substantial, but the material he had gathered was extraordinary. insights into Eastwood's process that few journalists had ever been privy to. As the crew began packing up equipment, Eastwood approached Marcus, assessing him with that penetrating gaze. "Rough day?" he asked, echoing Tomas's earlier question. "Worth it," Marcus replied honestly. Eastwood nodded, seemingly satisfied with the answer. "Tomorrow we're back on the town set. Interior scenes, saloon confrontation, less physically demanding." The consideration behind this information wasn't lost on Marcus. Eastwood had noticed his struggle today and was letting him know that tomorrow would be easier. "I'll be there," Marcus assured him. "Good." Eastwood turned to leave, then paused. "Morgan giving you trouble?" So he had noticed their interaction. "Nothing I can't handle." A ghost of a smile touched Eastwood's lips. "Studio types, always protecting, something that doesn't need protecting." With that cryptic comment, he departed, leaving Marcus to wonder once again about the legendary director's motivations in granting this unprecedented access. Back at his hotel, Marcus found the energy to transcribe his notes despite his exhaustion. The patterns in Eastwood's directing style were becoming clearer: the trust in actors' instincts, the preference for natural lighting, the minimal dialogue in emotional scenes. His article was taking shape in his mind, a portrait not just of a director at work but of a philosophy of filmmaking that prioritized truth over technique. He was midway through his notes when his phone rang, Sophia eager for an update. Marcus described the canyon shoot in detail, emphasizing the visual drama and Eastwood's handling of the complex sequences. "This is incredible access," Sophia enthused. "But I'm still not clear on why he's allowing it. Have you figured out his angle yet?" "Not entirely," Marcus admitted. "He mentioned reading my work over the years, seeing how I've changed as a journalist." "Professional curiosity isn't enough," Sophia insisted. "There's got to be more to it. Maybe he's testing you for some reason. Or maybe this really is his final film, and he wants someone thoughtful to document the process." "Maybe," Marcus conceded, though neither explanation felt complete. After finishing the call, Marcus took his evening medication and prepared for bed, his body aching from the day's exertion. As he drifted toward sleep, his mind returned to Morgan's veiled warning and Eastwood's cryptic comment about protecting something that doesn't need protecting. What exactly was being protected here? Eastwood's legacy? The film's commercial? Prospects? Or something more personal? The question lingered as he fell into an exhausted sleep, his trembling hands finally still beneath the desert motel's thin blanket. Day 3 on Eastwood's set began with a different energy. Back on the Western Town set, the crew moved with practiced efficiency, setting up for interior scenes in the saloon. Marcus arrived early, feeling more refreshed after a better night's sleep and grateful for the shade the indoor setting would provide. Kate Wilson greeted him with a terse nod, progress from the cold shoulder of his first day, and directed him to a position near the bar where he could observe without being in the shot. The saloon had been meticulously dressed to reflect its dual time periods, modern elements subtly integrated with Western historical details, reinforcing the film's theme of past and present colliding. Mr. Reynolds. Marcus turned to find Tomas. Rivera approaching, script in hand, costume already in place, worn jeans, dusty boots, and a faded work shirt that suggested a modern cowboy rather than a historical figure. "Good morning," Marcus greeted him. "Ready for today's scenes?" "As ready as I'll ever be." Tomas glanced around the saloon set nervously. "Big, emotional confrontation today. The scene where my character finally faces his past." "Eastwood seems to have a gift for guiding actors through emotional material," Marcus observed. The saloon was quiet between takes, lit only by soft tungsten rigs designed to emulate late afternoon, sunlight streaming through the high windows. Clint Eastwood stood by the monitor, arms crossed, his weathered face still and unreadable as Thomas delivered a raw, stuttering monologue into the empty room. Marcus watched from behind the safety line, his notepad trembling slightly in his left hand. He hadn't written a single word in 5 minutes. The scene unfolding in front of him, the emotional catharsis of a character confronting a ghost from his past, was too eerily resonant. The lines Thomas spoke weren't just scripted sorrow. They felt like an echo of Marcus's own buried regrets, his own long unspoken apology. "I let her believe I didn't care," Thomas said on screen, voice catching in the still air. "All those years. And I let silence do the talking." Cut. Eastwood didn't move for a moment. Then he simply nodded. "We got it." The crew exhaled collectively, the tension easing. Tomas looked dazed, almost disoriented from the depth he'd gone to. Clint walked over to him, said something too quiet to hear. Tomas nodded, rubbing the back of his neck and exiting through the batwing doors, leaving the saloon echoing with a silence that wasn't quite empty. Kate Wilson appeared at Marcus's side. "Come with me," she said, voice clipped, eyes shadowed. Marcus blinked. "Now?" She was already walking. "You're going to want to see this." They walked past trailers and parked generators to a quieter area behind the wardrobe tent, where Eastwood's production bungalow sat slightly apart from the rest of the activity. Kate keyed open the door and gestured him inside. The small room smelled faintly of leather, coffee, and the desert dust that seemed to coat everything. Inside, a worn wooden desk dominated the space. Atop it sat a thick leather-bound folder. Eastwood's name was etched on the front in faded gold letters. Kate closed the door behind them. "Clint told me to show you this when I thought you were ready." "I wasn't sure I'd ever think that," she admitted. "But after the canyon, shoot, and the way you handled yourself with Morgan," Marcus stiffened. "Morgan? You mean James Morgan?" Kate's lips tightened. "No, I mean Morgan Freeman." He stared at her. "What does Morgan Freeman have to do with this film?" "Not this film," she said. "With everything." She opened the folder. Inside was a collection of old correspondence. Letters, contracts, even studio memos, all carefully preserved. Kate slid one across the desk to Marcus. He read the letterhead. Warner Brothers Legal Affairs. March 1993 below, that in terse legal phrasing was a summary of a settlement. Confidential. Involving a defamation claim. Involving Marcus Reynolds. His breath caught. "I never sued Eastwood," Marcus said quietly. "You didn't," Kate agreed, "but someone else nearly sued on your behalf." She slid the next document across. A memo from Warner Brothers Public Relations. It referenced internal discussions about whether to fire Eastwood from future studio projects for unilaterally walking out of a press interview without prior approval. The studio was furious, Kate said. He walked out during the Unforgiven junket, a press event they'd spent weeks and millions setting up. Freeman had just started gaining traction in lead roles. The optics, if the tape had leaked, would have raised questions they weren't ready to answer. Marcus was numb. They were going to fire Clint Eastwood? No. They were going to discredit you, she said bluntly. The studio came this close to orchestrating a narrative that you deliberately tried to smear. Morgan Freeman, that you were pursuing a racial scandal for attention. They wanted to make you the villain to save their press machine. Clint shut it down. Marcus felt dizzy. What? What do you mean he shut it down? Kate handed him a final letter, handwritten, on Eastwood's personal stationery. To whom it may concern, if Marcus Reynolds is ever penalized, demoted, or disparaged by any employee of this studio for what transpired during our interview, I will personally terminate all current and future contracts with Warner Brothers and take my next project to Universal. Furthermore, I will speak publicly on the matter. The press, I suspect, will be eager to hear what I have to say about institutional scapegoating. C. Eastwood Marcus lowered the letter slowly. His hands were trembling again, and it wasn't from the Parkinson's. "You mean to tell me," he said, voice hoarse, "Clint Eastwood defended me after I said that? After he walked out?" Kate nodded. "He defended your right to grow. Said you were young, green, and more stupid than malicious. Said the press was full of young idiots who just needed a hard lesson, not a ruined life. But no one told me. Clint made them keep it quiet. You never knew because if you had, you'd write about it. And that would make the whole thing public anyway. He wanted your second chance to be yours, not something bought by his protection." Marcus sat heavily into the leather chair, head spinning. "And Morgan?" he asked after a long moment. "He never said a word publicly," Kate replied. "But he knew. Freeman and Clint are close. He was briefed on the whole thing. He agreed with Clint's assessment that you needed a lesson, not a noose." Marcus couldn't speak. For 30 years he'd carried guilt like a stone in his gut. And now, suddenly the narrative had shifted. Not erasing the mistake, but reframing everything that came after it. "Why are you showing me this now?" Kate hesitated. "Because I found out something else. James Morgan isn't just trying to protect Clint's legacy. He's trying to rewrite it." Back on set, the afternoon shoot was already underway, but the moment Marcus stepped outside the bungalow, he noticed a subtle change. Crew members moved differently, warier. Kate had said nothing about discretion, but she hadn't needed to. Something about what he'd just seen wasn't common knowledge. If it got out, it could spark a firestorm in an industry that now dissected every career under the magnifying lens of social media. He moved to the production tent for shade and found Thomas Rivera already sitting there, script in hand but eyes unfocused. "You look like you saw a ghost," Thomas said, sipping a bottle. "Of water. Something like that," Marcus replied. Tomas tilted his head. "You okay?" "Yeah," Marcus lied. "Just heat and history." "Let me guess. Morgan breathing down your neck?" Marcus didn't answer. The executive producer's name now carried a different charge. "He's got it out for me, too," Tomas continued casually. "Not a fan. Of me being too ethnic for the cowboy role. Said something about Eastwood casting for sentiment, not strategy." "Did you tell Clint?" Tomas shrugged. "Not yet. Figured it would just cause tension. But I've seen the way Morgan tries to override Clint on things. He doesn't just manage this project. He's trying to curate the narrative around it." The phrase hit Marcus like a jolt. Curate the narrative. "What if he's trying to rewrite history?" Marcus asked aloud. Tomas frowned. "What do you mean?" Marcus shook his head, unsure if he should share what Kate had shown him. Not yet. He needed confirmation. "And one person might be able to provide it. I need to call someone," Marcus said. The voice on the other end of the line was deeper, older, but unmistakable. "Marcus Reynolds. Didn't expect to hear from you again." "Morgan Freeman," Marcus said, his voice tighter than he expected. "Thank you for taking the call. Clint called ahead, told me you might be reaching out." Marcus was momentarily stunned. "He did. He said you might have finally earned the right to ask questions that matter." There was no hostility in Freeman's tone, just the weight of time and maybe a measure of curiosity. Marcus took a breath. 30 years ago, I said something. Unforgivable, and you never went public. You never retaliated." "No," Freeman said simply. "Because Clint was right. You were an idiot, but you were young, and people grow, if given the chance. I've carried that guilt ever since. Good. Means it mattered to you." There was a pause, and then Freeman added, "Kate showed you the letters, didn't she?" "She did. I had no idea." "You weren't supposed to." Clint believed in quiet accountability. Marcus sat with that for a long moment. "Why did he protect me?" "Because he believed you'd become the kind of journalist who'd tell the right story when it mattered." Marcus's throat closed. "I think this might be that time," Freeman added, "and I think you're about to find out what Clint really meant by the last rodeo." The next morning, the air on set felt unusually tense. Marcus arrived early, though he'd hardly slept. His conversation with Morgan Freeman had left him shaken, affirmed in some way he didn't fully understand. It was a strange thing to find yourself part of a story you were only meant to document. The saloon was being redressed for a new sequence, an intense flashback scene. Tomas Rivera would play his character younger, scruffier, more volatile, and the actress playing Maria, his daughter, would be shot from a different angle, wearing prosthetic bruising. "Today's the dark night of the soul," Kate had told Marcus earlier. "It's where the character either breaks or breaks through." Marcus wasn't sure if she was still talking about Thomas. As crew members adjusted lights and reset camera tracks, Marcus noticed James Morgan standing under the overhang of the set church facade, speaking with someone in a dark suit. Not a crew member. Studio, probably. A corporate type. The two were hunched over a digital tablet, and Morgan's face wore the expression of someone confirming numbers, budgets, or perhaps narratives. Marcus's eyes narrowed. He remembered Kate's words. Morgan isn't just protecting Clint's legacy. He's rewriting it. As Morgan walked off, Marcus ducked out from the shade and followed at a distance. He had no plan, only instinct. Morgan headed toward one of the trailers not typically used for talent, a producer's mobile office. Marcus waited until the door closed, then approached the side of the trailer. No one else around. He circled to the far side and found the window, cracked just slightly. Inside, voices. Eastwood's too sentimental these days, Morgan was saying. This isn't about honoring his process. This is about steering it somewhere useful. The second voice, nasal and unfamiliar, responded, You mean politically useful. Exactly. The Freeman thing back in '92. We've got the footage. All of it. I found the raw tapes in the archive last month. We've been scrubbing the metadata, cleaning the audio. The studio's going to use it if Eastwood doesn't retire quietly. Marcus's breath caught in his throat. The voice continued. That's nuclear. If it leaks, he protected a journalist who used a slur. Exactly why we'll control how it leaks. The story will be Eastwood's blind loyalty, legacy of enabling problematic behavior. We'll thread it just right, modernize the takedown. No one escapes unscathed, but the studio comes out the hero for revealing it. And Reynolds? Collateral. He's old, sick. He'll vanish from the press circle by year's end anyway. The story will be Eastwood's fall from grace, not Reynolds's. Marcus backed away from the trailer as nausea roiled in his gut. The truth wasn't just being buried, it was being twisted. Morgan wasn't protecting Clint's legacy. He was planning to assassinate it. Clint Eastwood wasn't on set that morning. Kate gave a vague excuse. Taking calls about final budget, approvals. But Marcus suspected more. He spent the morning quietly shadowing Tomas and the cinematographer as they filmed the flashback scene. The weight of the studio politics buzzed in the back of his head like a wasp in a bottle. By noon, Eastwood still hadn't returned. When Marcus finally found him, he was alone, sitting at the edge of the canyon from 2 days earlier, staring into the vast emptiness. A folding chair, a small cooler, and a script on his lap. Mind some company? Marcus asked softly. Eastwood nodded without looking. Marcus sat in silence for a moment before speaking. I heard what Morgan's planning. Clint didn't flinch. They're going to leak the 1992 tape. Spin it into something it wasn't. Clint exhaled through his nose. I figured. He's been circling it like a vulture. They think they can control the message. Paint you as an enabler. Clint finally turned his head, eyes sharp as a hawk's. They'll try. Marcus leaned forward. Why aren't you stopping it? Clint shrugged. Because maybe it's time. Time for what? To be erased by a studio memo? No. Time to let people see how complicated the truth really is. Marcus couldn't accept that. But it's not true. You didn't cover for me. You defended the idea that people grow. That's not scandal. It's principle. Clint stared back at the horizon. You ever seen a rodeo bull before it's put down? Marcus blinked. No. They don't fight it. Not really. They just stand there. All that fire spent. He looked at Marcus again. Maybe this is the moment I step down. Let the myth die. Let the man breathe. Marcus shook his head. That's not the story I'm going to write. Clint gave a small, tired smile. That's not your decision to make. They sat in silence again, the canyon swallowing the wind. Finally, Marcus asked, Is this really your last film? Clint didn't answer directly. He pulled a folded sheet of paper from the script in his lap and handed it over. Marcus unfolded it. It was a page from a screenplay. Not from Last Rodeo. It was titled The Ledger. A Western. The scene described a man in his 70s, standing in the ruins of a town he once helped burn down, a ledger in his hand. On every page, the name of someone he'd failed. You wrote this? Marcus asked. I did, Clint replied, but no studio would greenlight it, said it was too quiet, too unresolved. Marcus skimmed the scene. The protagonist doesn't beg forgiveness. He doesn't die. He just stands there, with the names. You were going to direct this? I still might, if this storm blows over. Marcus folded the page slowly. Then let's make sure it does. By nightfall, the saloon was being reset for the next day. Marcus sat in his room at the Sage Inn, laptop open, heart pounding. He'd made his decision. His article wouldn't wait for the film to wrap. He would write an exposé, not of Clint, but of Morgan's manipulation, the studio's weaponization of history. He titled the piece, The Ledger, Clint Eastwood, Truth and the Dangerous Business of Legacy. It began with the 1992 walkout, but not as a scandal, as a hinge. A moment where a young man failed and an old one showed mercy. The article outlined everything: the suppressed legal threats, Eastwood's handwritten letter, the studio's hidden agenda, and the plan to spin redemption into betrayal. It didn't preach. It told the truth plainly, supported by documents, voices, and the clarity that only 3 decades of hindsight could provide. He wrote through the night, and in the morning he hit send. To Sophia, to Lisa, to every outlet that had ever buried a nuance, for the sake of a headline. And when he arrived on set, Eastwood met his eyes across the dust-blown square. A nod passed between them. No words, just the understanding of 2 men who knew that no legacy worth keeping was built without risk. The desert sun hadn't yet breached the horizon when Marcus stepped out of his motel room, a steaming cup of hotel-grade coffee in one hand and the email confirmation in the other. His exposé had gone live at 4:01 a.m. A deep, researched piece published through Vanity Fair's digital front page, pushed simultaneously to social media through a meticulously coordinated blast orchestrated by Sophia. It was out. The truth. The ledger had been opened. By 5:30 a.m., Gaga Eastwood ledger was trending on Twitter. By 6, studio lawyers were circling. By 6:15, Lisa Chen texted, "The story is exploding. Sophia says every major outlet is requesting follow-ups. Morgan's office has gone radio silent." By 6:30, Marcus was standing at the edge of the last. Rodeo set in Victorville, eyes squinting at the early light pouring in across the western facades. He wasn't sure if he'd be welcomed or escorted off the lot. But he was there, standing his ground. The crew was quieter than usual, not cold, just cautious. Kate Wilson approached him first, no script binder in hand, no headset. Just her eyes, serious, searching. "You published it," Marcus nodded. "Did I cross a line?" Kate shook her head slowly. "No." "You walked." straight up to one and made sure no one else would pretend it wasn't there. They stood in silence for a moment. "He's in the church," she finally said. "He wanted to be alone before call." Marcus walked across the dusty lot, boots, crunching over gravel, toward the old wooden church that Eastwood's team had built for a pivotal scene. It looked fragile in the light, aged wood, bleached pale, steeple crooked as though weighed by time itself. Inside, the stained glass glowed amber from the rising sun. Clint Eastwood sat alone in the front pew, a rolled-up script in his lap, flask of water beside him on the bench. He didn't look up when Marcus entered. He didn't need to. "You saw it," Marcus said quietly. "I did." A long pause stretched between them, a silence full of air and memory. "You burned it all down," Clint said, voice low, almost thoughtful. "I told the truth," Marcus replied. Clint finally looked up. "Same thing, sometimes." Another pause. Then Eastwood gave a single nod. Good. It was time. The morning's shoot didn't begin on schedule. The ripple effect of the exposé was spreading. Reporters had already begun circling the Victorville lot, some with press credentials, some with cameras. Kate had to increase perimeter security. James Morgan was nowhere to be found. The cast huddled in corners of the set, whispering. Crew members debated the ethics of silence, of complicity. Some were angry, some inspired. All of them felt the tremor beneath their boots. Clint arrived on set at 9 sharp. He wasn't smiling, he wasn't scowling, he was directing. "All right," he said, voice steady and low. "We've got 2 days of principal photography left. If this is going to be my last, we'll go out doing it right." He turned to Kate. "Script changes." Kate handed him a single page. "The scene in the saloon," she said. "You wanted to add the ledger line." He glanced at it, then handed it to Thomas Rivera. "Today, it's yours." Thomas read it silently, eyes widening. "This is from the other script," he murmured. "The one you showed Marcus." Clint nodded. "It's time we bring it in." Thomas looked up, something flickering behind his eyes. "Are you sure?" "I am." He turned to Marcus. "You want to see what truth looks like on film?" Marcus didn't respond. He just raised his recorder. The saloon set was relit. The interior scene called for Thomas, his character having just confronted a violent past, to sit alone in silence. A bartender would offer him a drink. He'd refuse. Then he'd open a weathered notebook, the ledger. Clint watched quietly from the monitor as Tomas took position. Roll sound. Speed. Camera. Rolling. Scene 108A. Take 1. Action. Tomas sat at the bar. His shoulders sagged under invisible weight. The bartender poured a glass and slid it across. Tomas didn't touch it. He pulled out the ledger. His hands shook, subtly, not from fear, from memory. He opened the notebook slowly. "I used to think names were just names," Tomas said softly. "People you wronged, people you left behind. But every page in here has a weight, some heavier than others." He turned a page. One name still burns. He looked up. My own. Cut. Clint didn't say a word. He stood, walked onto set, put a hand on Tomas's shoulder. Squeezed. "That's the one," he said. By afternoon, the press breach became official. The studio sent a representative, someone, young, nervous, not important enough to do real damage. He asked to speak with Clint. Clint declined. James Morgan finally reappeared, storming into the production tent like a tornado dressed in designer boots. He went straight for Marcus. You had no right," he said through clenched teeth. Marcus stood up slowly. "I had every right. You tried to destroy a man's legacy for PR optics. You jeopardized the film." "No," Marcus said. "You did, when you decided to control history instead of tell it." Morgan turned on Kate next. "You enabled this." Kate crossed her arms. "I protected it." For 30 years. Morgan's eyes scanned the crew, many of whom had stopped pretending not to watch. "You just burned your bridge to Warner Brothers," he said to Marcus. Clint's voice cut through like a pistol shot. "Then we'll build a new one." Everyone turned. Clint Eastwood stood in the doorway of the production tent, shoulders squared, eyes blazing. "You think I need your studio to tell stories," he said. "I was telling them before you were born, and I'll keep telling them until the lights go out." Morgan opened his mouth, but Clint raised a hand. "Leave. You're no longer part of this production." It was the quiet authority, not the volume, that carried weight. Morgan hesitated, but he knew. His power was gone. He turned, furious, and left without another word. That night, Clint called a meeting. Everyone gathered on the saloon set under hanging lanterns, the desert wind brushing against weathered planks. "I want to say something," he said, standing in front of cast and crew. "This film isn't about me. It's not about legacy. It's about truth. And we've all been part of something bigger than ourselves these last few weeks. Bigger than a box office. Bigger than Oscar buzz." He looked around. "I'm not a perfect man, but I've tried all my life to be a principled one. And Marcus reminded me why that still matters." All eyes turned to Marcus. "I walked out of an interview 30 years ago," Clint continued, "and I never thought I'd sit across from that same man and see someone worth listening to. But people change, and when they do, we owe it to them. To let them." He took a breath. "This may be my last film. Or maybe not. But if it is, I can't think of a better last line than this." He nodded toward Tomas. "Every page in here has a weight. Some heavier than others." Silence fell. But it wasn't empty. It was full. Marcus returned to the motel that night in a fog of exhaustion and clarity. His inbox had exploded. Requests for interviews, congratulations, even a carefully worded letter from Warner Bros. Legal. Lisa had sent 3 voicemails of encouragement. Sophia had left a message offering to extend his contract, triple his column rate, and possibly nominate him for an award he didn't even know existed. But Marcus didn't reply to any of it. He sat by the motel window, watching the stars above the desert, his recorder on the table beside him. He pressed play. Tomas's voice filled the room. "Some names burn heavier than others." He let the line play again, and again. And when it ended, he whispered to himself, "So, do some silences." The final day of shooting dawned under an iron gray sky. A dust storm the night before had swept the Victorville lot, leaving a film of grit over every wagon wheel, storefront window, and exposed length of dolly track. The crew arrived early, faces tight with fatigue and focus. No one spoke above a whisper. They all knew. This was it. Clint Eastwood's last day on set. The old man in the director's chair had said nothing definitive, but they'd all felt it. In their bones. This wasn't just the end of Last Rodeo, it was the end of something larger. The last stand of a cinematic outlaw. Marcus arrived early, dressed simply in jeans, a faded black windbreaker, and worn boots that once belonged to his father. His right hand trembled slightly, but he kept it close to his side, fingers curled, into his palm, like a secret. He passed the gate without fanfare. No reporters this time. Just stillness, like the breath the earth takes before the storm breaks. Kate Wilson met him outside the production trailer, headset around her neck but forgotten, script binder clutched under one arm. "He wants to see you," she said. "Clint?" She nodded. "He's rewriting the ending." Inside the church, Clint sat beneath the windowpane of an unpainted cross, a single draft page resting on his knee. The room smelled of sawdust and old ambition. His expression was unreadable. "You changed the final scene," Marcus said. "I did." "Why?" Clint looked up. "Because you did. He handed Marcus the page. The film's protagonist, played by Tomas Rivera, had been written to ride away at dawn, leaving his daughter behind with the ledger in hand. The classic ending: regret without closure, distance instead of healing. Now, the last scene had changed. The daughter reads the ledger aloud. Every name. She finds one scribbled at the bottom. Hers. When she looks up, her father hasn't ridden away. He's still there. Waiting. "I think the audience deserves to see what happens next," Clint said. Marcus looked at him. "And what does happen?" "That's the part we don't film," Clint said. "That's the part they feel." The setup took hours. The canyon location was harsh, light shifting every 5 minutes between brilliance and overcast gloom. Tomas and the actress playing his daughter, Elena Morales, rehearsed quietly under Clint's watchful eye. Marcus stood nearby, not behind the camera or the crew, just close enough to feel the gravity of it all. The emotional scene would be shot. In one continuous take, Clint's direction was simple. Don't act. Just remember. Everyone cleared out except for the camera team, the sound tech, and Marcus. "Rolling," Kate said, her voice cracking slightly as she called it. Tomas stepped forward, hat in hand, eyes low. "I kept thinking I was protecting you," he said to Elena. "But I was just hiding." Elena opened the ledger. The prop had been weighted with blank pages, except for the last one. She turned to it. "Read the names," then stopped. "This last one. It's me." She looked up. Thomas didn't speak. He didn't have to. The silence was the answer. He wasn't running anymore. Clint stood. "Cut." No one moved. The silence stretched. Then, slowly, like a wave rising at sea, the crew began to clap, one by one. Soft at first, then louder. It wasn't for Thomas. It wasn't even for the scene. It was for the man who had just called cut for the last time. Clint Eastwood didn't smile. He simply nodded, then whispered to Kate, "That's the one." An hour later, the wrap party was in full swing in the dusty lot behind the set. Tables were set up with folding chairs, strings of lights cast a golden glow, and beer bottles clinked. Over impromptu toasts, crew members told stories. Someone played acoustic guitar. Thomas danced with Elena while Kate hovered nearby, pretending not to tear up. Marcus sat at the edge, recorder off, just watching. Lisa Chen called. "You did it," she said. "No," Marcus replied. "We did." Clint saw the piece. Twice. Sophia said he printed it out and underlined passages. In pen. Marcus let that sit in his chest like warmth. "Come home soon," Lisa added. "The city misses you." "I'll be back," Marcus said, but not yet. After hanging up, he stood and walked to where Clint was nursing a cup of black coffee beside the lighting truck, away from the party. "Not a fan of parties?" Marcus asked. Clint smirked. "I've seen enough of them." Marcus hesitated. "Was that your last shot?" Clint looked up at the stars, quiet. Then, "Maybe." Marcus waited. "I made films to tell the truth," Clint said finally. "Not always the big truth. Sometimes just a man and his horse, a daughter and her. Grief, a mistake made and paid for." He looked at Marcus. "But lately, the world wants legends, stories they can dismantle, heroes they can revise. I don't want to be a statue they melt down. I'd rather walk away before they put me on a pedestal just to knock me off." "You're not a statue," Marcus said. Clint turned fully to him. "Now. And you're not the man I walked out on 30 years ago." That landed with quiet force. "You changed," Clint said. "And not just in print. I saw it, on set, in the way you watched, in the way you listened," Marcus swallowed. "I'll never stop regretting what I said." "Good," Clint replied, "but don't let it define you." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded envelope. Open this when you get back. To L.A. What is it? A note, Clint said, from the old man who used to walk into interviews with guns blazing, for the one who kept showing up with a notebook instead. The next morning, Marcus stood alone on the now deserted lot. The sets were being disassembled. The wagon wheels were stacked. The church steeple leaned slightly, no longer supported by narrative. He turned on his recorder one last time. "This is Marcus Reynolds," he said quietly, "and I've just watched the last film of a man who once walked away from me, and this time I'm the one staying behind." He clicked it off, got in his car, and drove home. Los Angeles was a different kind of quiet when Marcus returned. Not the hushed solemnity of the desert, but the compressed hum of a city holding its breath between scandals and sunrises. It was the Monday after the wrap of Last Rodeo, and the industry was still reeling from the aftershocks of his article. Billboards advertising summer blockbusters loomed along the 1-1 freeway, but none of them carried the gravity of the words that had gone live 3 days earlier. The Ledger, Clint Eastwood, Truth, and the Dangerous Business of Legacy. Marcus's apartment felt untouched in his absence. Framed magazine covers on the wall, neatly stacked books on the coffee table, his leather notebook where he'd left it. But he wasn't the same man who had walked out that door. He had returned from the desert with something he hadn't expected. Peace. It was unfamiliar, a kind of silence in the body that replaced years of low-frequency self-loathing. He made coffee and sat by the window, his phone vibrating with missed calls and new messages. Sophia, Lisa, Tomas, a publicist from Eastwood's camp, a reporter from the New Yorker. But he ignored them all for now. Instead, he reached for the envelope Clint had given him. It was heavy, sealed with old-fashioned wax. Inside was a single-page letter, handwritten on thick cream stationery. Marcus read the words slowly. "Marcus, there are things I've never said on camera. Not because I'm afraid, but because they don't belong to the audience. They belong to the people who stood beside me in the dust, in the dark, in the silence between takes. You were once a boy who didn't know the weight of a word, but you carried that weight for 30 years. That's more than most do. You turned shame into service. That's integrity. What you wrote was brave and true and earned. This world loves redemption stories, but only when they end in spectacle. You chose something harder, the quiet kind, the kind where the hero doesn't get applause, just clarity. That's why I invited you in, not for an article, for a reckoning. We both showed up, now we both can go home." Clint Marcus closed the letter, with shaking hands, and pressed it gently to his chest. He let the silence settle again, this time not with dread, but with gratitude. Then he picked up the phone and called Lisa. "Thought you were ghosting me," she answered. "I needed a minute." "How are you?" "Still processing." "Well, do it fast. Sophia's about to pitch your story as a documentary series. Streaming rights are already in a bidding war." Marcus blinked. "A series?" "Clint gave permission this morning. He said, and I quote, 'If it gets the truth to stick, let him film it.'" Marcus didn't know what to say. Lisa continued, her voice softening. "You changed something. Marcus, not just your reputation, not just Clint's. You reminded people that journalism isn't about canceling or glorifying. It's about witnessing." He exhaled slowly. "Then let's do it right." "Good, because there's a screening of the rough cut tomorrow. Clint wants you there." The screening room at Warner Brothers was smaller than Marcus expected. 40 seats, no frills, just clean lines and dimmed lights. A small temporary marquee outside the door read, "Private viewing. Last Rodeo. Rough cut." Inside, a handful of executives, producers, and trusted collaborators filed in quietly. Kate Wilson was already seated near the center, reading production notes. Tomas Rivera stood in the aisle talking with Elena Morales, both of them dressed like civilians now. No dust, no denim, just muted colors and easy laughter. Clint arrived last, alone, in a navy jacket and his signature squint. The room went still as he entered. He looked at Marcus. "You ready?" Marcus nodded. Clint pointed to the empty seat beside him. "Then sit." The lights dimmed, the screen flickered, and the film began. Last Rodeo wasn't a Western in the traditional sense. It was quieter, more introspective, more like a whispered confession than a shootout. The aging rancher, played by Thomas, wasn't a gunslinger or a rebel. He was a man who'd made mistakes, not dramatic, cinematic mistakes, but the kind that chipped away at people over years. Estrangement, silence, pride. But it was Elena's performance that landed like a blow. Her eyes carried years of betrayal, tempered by a will to understand. When she read the ledger aloud near the end of the film, there wasn't a sound in the theater, except maybe Marcus's heart breaking open. And then came the new ending. The father didn't ride away. He stayed, cut to black. No swelling music, just a beat of silence, and then the credits. No applause. No rustling, just reverence. Outside the theater, people gathered in loose clusters, murmuring. Marcus found himself standing alone until Tomas approached. "You okay?" Marcus nodded. "That was... I know." They didn't need to say more. Then Clint approached. He looked at Thomas. "You earned every frame of that." Then at Marcus. "So did you." Kate joined them, a rare softness in her face. "The festival reps want it. Sundance, Venice, maybe even Berlin." Clint raised an eyebrow. "You going to Europe, Reynolds?" "I'll go where the story leads," Marcus said. Clint reached into his pocket, pulled out a matchbook from some Carmel diner Marcus didn't recognize. "Then take this." Marcus opened it. Inside was a note scribbled in block letters. "Your turn. Write something that outlives both of us." He looked up. Clint was already walking away. In the weeks that followed, the industry responded. Awards chatter began to swirl. The exposé was nominated for a Polk Award. Sophia's phone didn't stop ringing. Lisa received a job offer from the New York Times, which she declined to stay with Marcus as they prepared for the documentary series. The footage from the last rodeo set, combined with archival material and interviews, began shaping into a companion piece to Marcus's article. Tomas agreed to narrate. Clint contributed 2 on-camera interviews. One sober, one unexpectedly funny. But it wasn't until Marcus sat in his apartment one quiet morning, reviewing audio clips for the final edit, that he realized what the story had become. It wasn't about Clint, or Marcus, or even the ledger. It was about how one word, spoken carelessly, had rippled through time, and how silence, when broken with honesty, could build something stronger than redemption. Understanding. On the day the documentary premiered on streaming, Marcus visited his neurologist. The tremors had worsened slightly. Typing was harder now. Some days, so was speaking. But when he returned home, he found a package on his doorstep. No return address. Inside was a single item, a leather-bound journal, identical to the prop from the film. Except this one had writing on the first page. The ledger below it, in ink, let the record reflect. People can change. Marcus opened a new notebook. He wrote the first sentence of a new piece. In the year Clint Eastwood walked out of an interview, he began a story that wouldn't finish for 30 years. He kept writing. The tremor was there. But so was the clarity. So was the peace. So was the light. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.